the other thing we were talking about off the air, and this is not as positive, but I was talking about the difference between the experience that kids are going to have in school. And you got some data, I think it was out of Newark, right? Which is just, there's all this talk, and I'm going to let you hit the data, but my wife is a guidance counselor before we had our third kid and chaos kind of hit in our house. But this has been a big deal for her, and we've had this discussion a lot in the House, that the Democrats claim that they are the party of equity and inclusion and that they want to make sure that everybody has an even playing field. And their response to COVID, as it pertains to kids that are at home and might not have Wi-Fi, that may not have parents that can help them get online, may not have laptops, may not have access to the internet, their response to COVID has ensured, by these kids not being able to be in school, has ensured that the poorest and the least advantaged kids among us are going to fall further and further behind compared to the advantaged kids. And it's as if Randy Weingarten and all these Teachers Association union people, they won't even address this, but the numbers, again, we try to look at data, Buck, right? On this show, we try to share data. The data is terrifying for anyone who believes in equal opportunity of education.
So this is from Chalkbeat in Newark. Just 9% of students met math standards this spring, according to the latest data. And when you start to look at what the comparisons are here, when you start to get a sense of how it lines up to pre-pandemic versus now. Now, keep in mind, Newark is a largely, it's a majority minority district for, in terms of schools. It's more minorities than there are non-minorities in the school districts there. Or the public school system. 2019, third grade math, 35% proficiency. Now, let's keep in mind, that's not very good, but it's 35%. As of 2021, Clay, 10%. Third grade reading, 28%. That was in 2019. And in 2021, 14%. Cut in half. Eighth grade math, 2019, 25% proficiency. 2021, 12% efficient. Again, cut in half. And then this was the biggest gap. Eighth grade reading. In 2019, 44% of students who took the New Jersey Student Learning Assessment in 2019, 44% were proficient in eighth grade reading. In 2021, Clay, 12%. So a complete fall off the cliff, loss of what feels like, years of learning because of just the way it's going to hold them back for a long period of time after this. How do they catch up? Remember, it's about a gap. Their peers in parochial and private schools were going to school normally.
And some good public schools.
And some good public schools stayed open. But the public school unions are very powerful Democrat constituencies, so they weren't going to be held to account for this. Somehow, it was safe to expect that the grocery store clerks in my neighborhood and the people who work at the CVS or the Duane Reade, somehow it was normal to expect that they would show up for work, but it was not to be expected that teachers could go in and be around small children who, as we know, not only are quite safe themselves from the disease, but are very unlikely to spread it to adults in the first place. This is a scandal. The data always suggested that they never should have shut down schools. They shut down schools because they could get away with it politically and because they wanted to. And this is one of those areas where people like me and you who are saying this is madness.
Yes.
Back in the August 2020 timeframe, we're being told, oh, you don't care about the people who are on the front lines and teachers are frontline workers and all this stuff. And it was just hysteria. And it was people picking preferred constituencies and saying they can have special privileges, but the rest of us have to live by a different set of rules that all have to do with what's powerful within the Democrat Party. It's disgusting, though. These kids are suffering, Clay. How do you catch up? What do we think? The public school system is troubled enough in Newark. Now they're going to get really excellent. Plus, they're going to be masking kids up.
Yeah, and to me, this is what should be one of the main stories for the past year in terms of its long-range impact for kids. And Buck, to your point about shutting down, remember 15 days to stop the spread or whatever the heck it was, you always fight the battles of future wars, as you well know as a military history guy too, based on the technology of the past war. what's so frustrating and what so few people will even acknowledge now is the decision to shut down schools was based on 100 years ago what happened with the flu, when the flu actually in 1918-19 presented a substantial risk to kids in a way that COVID never did. And so it was a failed process, and I think we're going to be, unfortunately, dealing with the fallout from this for generations to come.
And you can even see with the way that Democrat officials are talking about school reopen and who's to blame here, and they have learned no lessons. I mean, we can talk about what Education Secretary Cardona was saying to singling out Florida as if they're the problem.
We need to talk about that.
We'll get into it.
Don't be the reason why schools are interrupted. Our kids have suffered enough. Let's do what we know works. Let's do what we know works across the country. We shouldn't get politics doesn't have a role in this. Educators know what to do. We did it last year. So I have calls out to those states. But at the end of the day, I want to work with Texas. I want to work with Florida. I want to make sure those students have access to in-person learning.
Welcome back to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show. That was the Education Secretary Cardona talking about DeSantis and Abbott. Of course, now a big part of the Democrat push is to make it seem like Texas and Florida are the big, bad COVID super spreader states where all the terrible things have happened. Meanwhile, Florida, for deaths per 100,000 residents, is about 25 in the country, which, given that it's a state that never shut down, is pretty interesting. But also, the pretense here, Clay, continues to be that the people that shut down the schools are now the people who are working so hard to keep them open. If it wasn't for lunatic Democrat teachers unions who knew they could throw their weight around, I mean, Randy Weingarten and some of the other teachers union heads were meeting with the Biden administration. And then the Biden administration, this is in the advance of the 2020 school year, the Biden administration was pretending that this was just the science. Oh, well, you're actually meeting with the teachers unions to see, what kind of thuggery they are willing to use to demand that everybody gets paid their full salary to sit at home for a year. That's what
Not
actually
only get their
happened.
full salary, get supplements, even though you sat at home for the year, didn't do your job, and then we all give this huge COVID stimulus bill, which I think the data is all reflecting is completely unnecessary, all that $1.9 trillion or whatever it was. And a lot of these different teachers who refused to go to work got paid more to not work. It is, I think, the biggest public policy failure. I mean, COVID in general is, but schools not being open is the biggest public policy failure of most of our lives. I mean, it truly is, because you think all the different things that come from school not being open. Buck, think about it. Women's unemployment was the highest in 30 years because women bear the brunt of childcare. You had kids obviously not getting their education. You had places not able to hire and work their normal employees because of all this. It all spirals into a total mess.
Yeah, and it didn't have to happen. I mean, there was no real justification for it other than the people that were making the decisions wanted to keep the people who didn't want to go in and do their jobs happy. I mean, I've been going into an office to tape TV for almost a year now. I mean, there's so many people that have had to go in and do their jobs. There was no choice for them to stay at home the whole time. And yet, the funniest or the most appalling, depending on how you look at it, situation is that now the people that shut everything down are like, well, come on, do everything we say, mask up, or else you will be the reason why the schools close again. But here's Governor Ron DeSantis. They hate him because he does like freedom, talking about how it's going to be up to parents whether their kids wear masks or not.
In Florida, though, we think it's really important that parents make decisions about whether kids go to school with masks or not. So if certain parents feel that they want their kids doing that, we're not going to prevent that. We have a lot of parents, including me, who doesn't think that's healthy for our kids to be wearing masks all day. And I know people like Joe Biden think the government should force kindergarteners to sit there under these masks for 6, 7, 8 hours a day. I could just tell you, Laura, in Florida last year in our school districts, we had some that had mask requirements, others that didn't. The ones that didn't, those counties had lower per capita cases than the ones that did. And so it's not proven to really impact viral transmission in schools. And so that's why I think it should be the parents' decision and it shouldn't be mandated by the government.
I mean, how do they answer that, Clay? He says that the school districts without the mask
choice.
mandates were doing better than the school districts with the mandates for masks. So I thought that's what we call data. I thought that's how we're supposed to make these decisions. Apparently,
that's 100% what we're supposed to do. And that's why I think DeSantis drives Democrats crazy, because all of his choices are not shoot from the hip. They're not virtue signaling. They're not cosmetic theater. Look at what the data reflects. And the other thing we should mention, we kind of hinted at it a little bit, Buck, the fact that Florida has their surge right now is what typically happens because of air conditioning, right? Anybody who knows Florida, it gets super hot. People go indoors. That's why they go up in the virus right now. Other places go up later.